There's a new way to stay connected and know what's happening with Market to Market when you subscribe to Market Insider. One email and a lot of information awaits you. Go to markettomarket.org and subscribe to Market Insider. Hello, everybody. I'm Paul Yeager. This is the MTOM podcast, a production of Iowa PBS and the Market to Market TV show. Today, we are going to school with Angie Setzer. We're going to do our grain marketing 201 class and 202. This is the first of two parts. We've split up a long conversation with Angie into two bites that go through a lot of the fundamental side of marketing grain. We're going to talk about all sorts of plans, incremental selling, access, assessing, and access, both. We'll also talk about logistics and understanding who wants your grain, when they want it, why they want it, and how you can be informed to do something better about it. First of two, so if you're watching these together, just back to back, boom. Otherwise, we'll see you next Tuesday. But first, let's get to class. It's time now with Angie Setzer. Hello, Professor Setzer.
Hello.
Do you want that to be your new intro?
I like it better than the Goddess of Grain, honestly. I think that we should change it.
No. You can't change midstream now. You're too far down the road to give that up.
Yeah, though I had worked really hard for it too, I guess, for doing absolutely nothing, I guess. But yeah.
Before I forget, I'm sorry I missed you the last time you were in the studio.
It was a bummer. It was a bummer, but Brooke did great. Like I can't lie. Who was subbing was phenomenal. So I missed you, but I enjoyed the conversation.
She's wonderful, and she's always and you watched her on local TV when you were living in Iowa, so it was kind of fun.
Yeah, I fangirled a little, to be completely honest. I was like, oh my gosh, I know you. You've been in my living room before, and you didn't even know it. So
yeah, well. There's a whole nother line that I usually give in public. I don't think I'll do it on this podcast because it's recordable, about that. When you started in this business, I think I asked you this a long time ago. Why did you do it?
Why initially was to make money. I think that's how everyone gets involved, right? But like once I grew up on a farm and I watched our family farm kind of go from being something to not being something. And as I started to work with farmers, I really realized that in a lot of ways, there was a lack of clarity, and I don't even know if it was necessarily, hey, there was a lack of education 20 years ago. I'm not going to lie. Now you can't really argue that it's there as much, but I just felt like there were so many things that were well known amongst folks that were in the commercial side of the business, that were taught the traits of merchandising and things that weren't passed on to the farmer. And the farmer was there sitting, kind of working to improve their production practices and working to do all kinds of different things, but really wasn't given the toolbox or the tools at which to better, their grain marketing decisions. And so for a lot of them, and at the time when I started, like, let's be honest, like we traded from $2 to $2.75 in a 2-year time period. So it wasn't quite the same as what it is now. But, what really started to drive me, what really fueled my passion was seeing how many growers were able to learn and improve what they were doing just by being like, hey, have you thought about looking at spreads? Have you thought about looking at approaching your marketing differently? Things like that, and really seeing kind of the light bulb go off and learn that you can help folks improve what they're doing there.
But 20 years ago, these tools were there, though, right? Just not being utilized is what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, I started in 2005, so I wasn't too awful far. I think it was less than a decade after the HTA debacle, of the mid-90s. And so there were a lot of people that were absolutely just still, heavily against HTAs. And that was one of the things for me early on that I had found was the better tool for my growers. And so there were a few different things out there where you had the tools, you had the tips, you had the things that you could have at your fingertips, but we also didn't have the internet. We didn't have podcasts. We didn't have any of that sort of thing. So a lot of what folks were learning was either by being, attending workshops in person or maybe through a magazine, which magazines are great, but we all know, how do you teach a lesson in current marketing plans or what have you when you're 30 days behind the calendar?
But we had newsletters. I mean, they at least started in the last 20 years, and there was information. I can remember the Pro Farmer coming to our
Hmm.
house. That was something my dad read word for word, the 8 pages that were in that each week. So there were things going out, and there were speakers going out. So Sue Martin, John Roach, Tom Fitzenmeyer, whoever would go speak to a group. They would talk about, the big question is, well, where are we headed? Are we going higher? Are we going lower? I mean, that's one thing. But it for you, I think, becomes more of an education side when you go out, right?
Yeah, yeah. I want growers to be able to, like if you give a man a fish, he can eat for a day. If you teach a man to fish, he can eat for life, right? Like I want to make sure that if I disappear tomorrow, that a lot of growers that I've worked with are able to take the tools that I've given them, and be able to do better for themselves. And I think that it has been a really it's part of why I wake up every day ready to rock and roll, right? Even when things are bad, like I love that I get to work with farmers and be able to have the feel like I'm providing them a service and giving them insight into something that is definitely not only helping their bottom line, but helping take a weight off their mind or their shoulders or whatever that may be, because it's hard to make marketing decisions. It's impossible to get it right, first off. So let's just all sit around and sing kumbaya for a minute because you're never going to nail it. Congratulations. Like there's a thing that you need to know. You're always going to be disappointed in your marketing, no matter what you do. Unfortunately, but I like to be that person that can kind of be like, all right, here are the things that we wanted to do initially. Here are the opportunities that we have in front of us now. Like, let's remember what we're trying to accomplish and put that together.
All right, let's put it away. We'll just ask that first question that I'm guessing you ask when you ask the farmer, what would you want to do? So that's the overall question. What do you want to do? And the answer usually is make money so I can do this again next
Right?
year. Okay, so
Yeah.
that's out of the way. Angie, it's the time of year when there is a big pile of grain. I have all my harvest done. Now
Hmm.
what?
Now what? Yeah. I think the biggest thing that I want to throw out there is this is not going to fit everyone's situation because everyone has a wide array of, market access, education, sales on the books, maybe not. Certain things that are going to influence their ability to make decisions and be successful, yada yada yada. But having said that, I think I can kind of come at it with a broad brush sort of standpoint and say the first step that you need to do is assess your situation. In when I was running the elevator, we had to do mark to market once a month. You had to do mark to market accounting where you basically had to take measurements, get an open stack of contracts. What did you have that needed to be taken care of and settled out? So from a farmer standpoint, what do you have that needs to be priced? Do you have stuff that's on delayed price? Do you have stuff that's on a basis contract? Taking in an overall picture and getting it written down on what you need to be looking to price and what you have on hand are your number one. That's your number one step. Assess your situation and then look to assess your local market. What kind of market structure are you selling into? Are you relying heavily upon the river system? Is the river going to be shutting down soon? Are you in northern Illinois or are you in southern, in the southern tributary system? Are you, akin to rail? Are you stuck going into Mexico? Like, what does your local market structure look like? Is it just ethanol? And then start to get a feel talking to your buyers, talking to folks around you, as to what the local situation is. Are your ethanol buyers looking to get coverage throughout Thanksgiving into December? Are they looking to maybe extend that out beyond, into January, February, or March? You need to be having the conversations and kind of assessing what is my demand center or what does the demand structure look like in my local market? And what does that mean when I, assume what basis is going to do? It's also important to take into consideration what historical or where basis tends to trade for you locally. And then, of course, part of assessing your local situation is taking into consideration where that value is currently versus where it would typically be.
All right, this is where I'm going to interrupt just for a moment because how do
Yes,
I
please.
know exactly? Because, as I like to say, like politics, all basis is local. But how do I know in my exact situation, because everybody's going to be different, that you can see a basis map, of course, those exist. But how do I assess what it is that you're saying I need to do? Is that phone calls? Is that looking on websites? Is that what?
It could be a whole host of things. It could be phone calls to your local buyers. I like that idea. Obviously for me in my role, I provide that intermediary sort of service to my growers. I'm the one here in the state that's calling the end user and doing the assessment for them. But if you're, obviously not working with me or someone like me, I definitely suggest the phone call route. For those of you that are perhaps Gen Z, millennials, or older, you're going to have some sort of real gut reaction to calling. Like you're going to be taken back to you're 12 and your mom's telling you have to call and order the pizza for the first time or something like that. Like you might panic a little bit, but that's okay. When it comes down to it, you want to be having this communication, these open lines of communication. Your local buyer is not your enemy. Your local buyer, if you let them know to a certain extent, okay, hey, I've got this many bushels I'm looking to move at this point in time, they're going to use that against you. They're going to use that to have a better feel for what's out there and what is able to move. Obviously, if you have a value in mind that you want to trade, if historically speaking, where you tend to sit, like for us, we tend to sit here in Michigan, we're 10 to 15 under. So I know a 10 to 15 under is in line with historical norms. Anything much better than that to me is a no-brainer and value, like we're going to commit. Anything much worse than that, probably going to hold off on. And so for anyone sitting local, that's the best thing to do. Be talking to your buyer, taking into consideration where your values are trading versus where you would typically see them, and then kind of work to decide what you're going to be looking at and when you want to be tapping into that market.
I'm going to call time out here. When you say consult your buyer, I know I should get a sign, right? And just says time out
Right?
on the floor, and then get the red hat and go, we'll wind it for 2:35 for the commercial break. Okay. I talked to a mutual friend of ours that you set me up with in Michigan, and I asked, what are his outlets? And he's like, well, I'm I'm almost even between this ethanol plant, this crush plant, and my local co-op, or my co-op, which doesn't have quite the same basis level that those other two do have. So when you say buyer, you mean buyers, plural, or do you
Buyers,
mean a
plural.
specific? Okay.
Yeah, I would say buyers plural. Like I think a lot of times one of the biggest errors that farmers get into, and it's understandable, right? You guys are drowning as it is. Like you barely have time to know what day it is most days. Like you have time to call 17 people, chat about the weather, feel really awkward, and then get a number and hang up. But you have to. Like either you have to or you need to start working with someone who can, because those are the conversations that are going to present you opportunities when the market is open. There are a lot of times that people, I think one of the biggest errors that I see from a farmer when it comes to marketing is they try to sell into a market that doesn't want the grain. Like farmers are seasonal, they're creatures of habit. They love to move stuff. They have to move stuff after the 1st of January. Obviously, we had tax problems leading up to the end of December or worries over tax problems leading up to the end of December. And so now everyone's going to sell a bunch of stuff after January 1st to generate income, get those payments paid. You know what I mean? Like April, you're going to see a lot of grain moved. Like there's a lot of times where you see a lot of grain move when it really could have been moved 3-4 weeks earlier and probably benefited the grower 10 to 15, 20 cents better. Maybe not always by any means, but I feel like so many times we're just like, oh, well, I know I need to move bushels after the first part of January. I'm going to go ahead and make that phone call on January 5th. And then you can't figure out why the market stinks, right? Like, let's be thinking about the things that we need to be doing well ahead of time, making those calls, having those conversations, figuring out when your buyers are going to be looking for bushels and what kind of values they're thinking will trade. And then they're going to be the ones to reach out to you when an opportunity presents itself because they know that you're engaged.
And you're talking a tiny bit there about that would be what you call seasonality?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Seasonality is an important thing to keep in mind and fight as a farmer, I feel like.
Okay, fair enough. So seasonality, I get it.
To a certain extent.
To an certain extent. Got it. You mean the fighting to a certain extent or seasonality? Sorry, I shouldn't make you try to do split takes.
The fighting to a certain extent. You want to fight, like seasonality you want to fight against when it comes to basis and pressure and things like that. But seasonality you want to be aware of when it comes to futures moves and marketing opportunities.
Okay, so then I want to go back to something you just said there, not wanting the grain. Know when somebody doesn't want the grain. How do I know that?
Typically when there's a lot of grain moving, I mean, it's one of those things that you can tend to sense, right? I wrote an article a while back that it seems commonsensical, but like, all right, your plant can't stay open. Like right now, we still have an issue. Our ethanol plant is full. They're working on a bin project. It should be up and running. Everything will be back to normal. But until that bin is done, they struggle with space, right? Okay, so until they're able to stay open 5 days a week at their normal hours, it's very unlikely that they're going to give me significant push on basis values, right? Like their belly's full currently, and I'm asking them if they want another piece of pie. It's just like Thanksgiving. You know you're going to eat 17 pieces of pumpkin pie within the next 48 hours. You're not going to eat them within 5 minutes of finishing the turkey or the prime rib or whatever, right? And that's the same thing. So if the lines are long, if the hours are short, if the values continue to widen, the market doesn't want your stuff. If there's no lines, if hours get extended, if all of a sudden we're open on the weekend, like these types of things, the market wants your stuff. And that is when you're primed to be looking to sell.
So when the lines are long, that's not a good time to sell. When
Exactly.
they're when they're calling me to say, "Do you have any grain?" Is that the best time to answer that call and make it? Or cynic and me, they're just trying to get a deal right now, thinking I'll hop right on the very first call.
And I think you don't want to hop on the first call. That's the point. Like you want to be engaged when your buyer is engaged. They want to dance. You want to dance. You have to dance. You have grain to sell. They have grain they need to buy. Let's work to find a common price at which we can agree. And if we don't, that's fine. Both parties can choose to walk away and someone else can come in. If you think your corn's worth $5, you have every right to sit and wait until someone pays you $5. You also have the risk that in the end you're going to have to sell it for 350. That's all there is to it. But when it comes down to it, if your buyer is calling you, that is not a time to ignore or hang up or whatever. It's a time to say, "Hey, yeah, I got 100,000 bushels I'm looking to move. I see your posted's 20 under. What are you thinking you're going to be?" "Oh, we'd probably do 15. "Yeah, I think it needs to be option." You need to have a number in mind that you want to throw back at them, but you want to be engaging in that conversation that they're wanting to have, because that is the time that you need or you will have the opportunities presented to you. As a farmer, you have to recognize that the commercials, the elevator people, they're having these conversations every day. For me, when I was managing my space, I knew what type of value I was looking for and what type of number I would sell a chunk of bushels at. And the end user knew what kind of value they were willing to pay. And we were always having a conversation, whether we were far off or not, about where those values would line up with one another.
And how, I don't know how much you'll peel back, but I mean, how much leeway did you have? But you also probably, going back to that initial thing you said about taking inventory of everything, you kind of had to know, all right, I bought these 100,000
Yeah.
4 cents cheaper than I probably should have. I do have a little bit of play now on, I mean, was that constantly in your mind?
Oh, constantly. Yeah. I mean, it still is to this point, and I'm not managing an overall position. I'm managing a bunch of positions that make up a whole. But yeah, when I was at the elevator, I always had an idea of what I was willing or what I could trade. I always needed to know what I could trade. And from a farmer standpoint, that is asking a lot. Like I would love if you guys had the ability, or you guys and gals, if everyone had the ability to know what they could trade at any point in time. But it's super important, that's where I come into play or whatever, but to just have a general feel, an overall idea of what that market is looking like. And like I said, communication is the key in that. And so many times we act like this buyer is the enemy. And the buyer's not the enemy. The buyer is the one that's going to provide you insight into what the market structure looks like and what, should be happening, what they feel like is happening. Like you can get a good sense of their overall gut feel. And if it's in a situation where you can't trust your local buyer, I'm gonna bet you, no matter where you sit in the corn belt, there is someone else within 60 miles that's gonna jump all over the opportunity of doing business with you.
And that opens up another bit of the negotiation leverage that a grower might have then.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
There is definitely a desire to be able to bring new people in. And there's a desire, amongst the ag professionals and originators out there to be able to create that new relationship with a grower. I guess that's what it is. It's a relationship business.
Now, when you were at the co-op chair, you were trying to you were trying to acquire, like any business,
Right.
the product at as economical of a sense, lowest as you
Mhm.
could, but you had to, and that's the same for an ethanol plant, that's the same for a crush facility, that's the same for whatever, right? They're all trying to acquire. So when a price goes down, say the price keeps going down and down and down, what recourse do I have against a situation like that where it keeps going, knowing that that buyer doesn't have to take my higher offer or take, and I'm stuck. What do I do now?
Well, I think that's one of the important factors that a lot of folks tend to ignore, or one of the things that separates the successful marketer from the marketer that maybe sits there and wonders what the heck just happened. And that is being aware that things can change, being aware that your assumptions may be wrong. For me this past year, I'll use the most perfect example, right? For me this past year, I had anticipated we would see some continuation of basis strengthening. Michigan had one of its largest crops that we had had in a significant amount of time. Much of the Eastern Corn Belt had. So our ability to rail grain out, whether it was going into the Southeast, whether it was going to Ontario, anyway, we weren't moving bushels. But I had still anticipated that we would see basis firm to where we could be trading 10, 15, like I said, back into normal levels as we worked our way through the spring and into the summer. Well, we ended up, our largest poultry producer in the state had bird flu, had to call every bird. And then Michigan, it spread to the point of where our entire commercial poultry herd flock had to be wiped out. And so my opinion on basis going to 10 under had to change in 5 minutes. I went from we have time, you're okay, we can be patient, we don't need to be in a hurry, to Friday afternoon calling every one of my customers, sending out blanket text alerts that basis needed to be booked between April through June because we were wiping out, 10 million bushels of corn demand in a peninsula. And so that is one of the most important things that I'll throw out there is you can have an assessment, you can have an assumption of what the market's going to do, especially right now. No one knows. We're wide open. There are a lot of things that could develop as we move ahead. But you need to make sure that you're aware if the situation changes, you're willing to change with it.
And when you say basis wiped out, you mean your local basis impact, right? So what, it was a
Tanked.
different
Yeah.
story for you in Michigan than it was for those in Illinois.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
We
All right.
saw a very, very different sort of situation. But yeah, we went from, me thinking we were going to see 10 under to trading 40, 50, 60 under for the bulk of the summer. And just simply because basis had wiped out and we didn't have the demand.
What if 48 hours or 2 weeks before believing your position that there's going to be this demand, what could a grower have done to prepare for a scenario like that?
Such a hard question, but I think the biggest thing is you just get prepared to make a decision if something changes significantly. I think, my growers were prepared, well, kind of like my growers were prepared to a certain extent, because they were tapped into a market, they were tapped into market intel. So I would say one of the most important things is again, goes back to that communication. Have these conversations with the people in your local market, pretty continuously, not continuously, but pretty consistently, once a week, once every other week, whatever that needs to be, because that is going to be the difference. And so that's what I would say. When it comes down to it, what you need to do to be prepared or able to, assess the situation if something changes dramatically is to be plugged into that market structure to where if something happens, your buyer or buyers who you're talking to, because one of them, even if you don't feel like you have a great relationship with one out of the three or two out of the three or whatever, you're going to find that one of them is going to be looking out for you and able to have that type of conversation, if you're plugged in.
So that's an information side. Is there anything I could have done for setting a position, setting, we hear all these terms and things like that. Is there
Mhm.
some type of marketing tool I could have done? That we hear this setting the floor.
Yeah,
Is
you'll get that
what
a
does
couple
that mean?
different ways.
You
I mean, there's a couple different ways that you can go about setting the floor, and each person's going to approach that individually. To me, I think the only real way to set the floor, truly set the floor, is to lock in your cash price. You have to lock in your flat price. Know what you're getting paid. Now, if you want to still party and stay somewhat long the market, then of course you can re-own with calls or something like that. Or well, it's not something like that. With calls. Calls are the only thing that are going to allow you to be tapped into the upside of the market structure. You can, of course, people will say that you set a floor with puts. I would argue that you do protect your downside risk with puts, but I think setting a floor is a disingenuous term for puts simply because you can spend money on a put that has time value in it. Like you could see the market just simply sit and spin for a while. You've spent that money on that put, you get closer to expiration, all of a sudden we fall off, but your put doesn't necessarily gain in value because your time is eroded. I've seen it before where a put doesn't really provide that floor. Does it give you a safety net? Does it provide you a feeling of being covered, and does it help to offset, some of the hit that comes with a downside move? Yes. But it's not the floor that people want you to believe it can be necessarily. And so, yeah, to me, if you really are in a situation where you're looking to absolutely set that floor, the only way to truly do that is to lock in the cash price that you're getting. And if you want to take off the cost of a call option on that and have that be your floor, like I'm getting, $4 less than 15 cents on my option, and so I'm taking no less than 385. That is an option, and that is something that you can do. There's just a lot of different ways that you can approach the market depending on what you like to do and who you're working with.
And that is something I have done with one of my buyers, is what you're saying.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I've done that plenty of time where you
Yeah.
can, and a lot of people will do that to where you'll have that opportunity of, a lot of different elevators out there will offer that tool for you.
Okay. So that is something that's there. And that's, I guess that's a tool in the
Mhm.
toolbox. So I've kind of taken you off your pattern. My apologies. Uh,
No, you're fine.
assess was the first thing. What
Yes.
we've assessed things. We've established conversations with our buyers. We're
Mhm.
aware of what's going on. They know who we are when we call. Now what?
Not remember your non-negotiables. And so you have a certain set of things that you cannot work around. They're non-negotiables. And you can use them in life and you can use them in your marketing. And so to me, your non-negotiables are your space, your cash flow, and your logistics needs. And so obviously your non-negotiables ahead of harvest include what grain needs to be moved. We're going to be marketing our grain that has to be moved at harvest that we don't have space for. First and foremost, that's going to be your first priority, but we're beyond that. So now we're looking at pouring bins, making sure that you're keeping your stuff on hand in good quality. And I'll have a lot of growers, not of mine, but I've interacted with growers who are like, I don't really need to core the bin. And I'm like, I too like to live dangerously, but I am going to push you to pull 10% out. You need to pull that center out. You need the grain to flow, especially in a year like this one. Y'all are harvesting corn that was 13% or less, beans that were 7% or less. You've got a lot of stuff. You're going to have a lot of junk that's going to come out. Like you're going to get the tips broke off your corn in some spots. It's just, I've had all kinds of crap thrown at me already. And we weren't even that dry at harvest as opposed to some of them across the corn belt. And so make sure you're coring your bins, taking into consideration what needs to be going out here over the next couple of few months. And then think about the cash flow needs. I had a grower and I feel like I pick on him every time, but I have a grower that I'd worked with from the start of my career. He was with me through the elevator and he's still with me today. And he'll laugh, he'd laugh if he ever listened to anything. Like, he doesn't listen to my interviews. He gets to, that's just ridiculous. Why would they do that? I always knew that he was going to call right after the January USDA report and tell me that we had 4 or 5 days to turn a lot of bushels into several $100,000 worth of cash because he had landlord payments due. You know what I mean? Like I knew, and so do you guys. When John Deere's due. When property taxes are due. When that seed bill is due. And so when the market gives you an opportunity and it pops up, and provides you an ability to sell 440 or some price out in the deferred time period that you think isn't a bad value, you want to sell the bushels that will help to cover those bills. Like, remove the need to move stuff into the market when you have to. Move it into the market or make the transaction when it's something you want to do and it fits the need that you have that lands into your non-negotiables. The third one is logistics. A lot of times I'll get growers that will have several 100,000 bushels that love to wait until July to figure out how to move it all. That's not this. Let's move chunks of it throughout the year, or at least make it to where we aren't panicking right before harvest because we don't have everything out that we needed to.
Well, because in that logistics side of the equation,
Mhm.
I think of there's the one guy that hauls the semi for 6 farmers. And if we all need that driver at the same
Yes.
time, if I'm fourth to call, I'm fourth in line
Yes.
because
Yeah.
we're
And
all
you weren't
calling at
moving
the
those
same time.
bushels right away.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I have to have it. All right, so I'm 2 weeks out from needing to make a payment on my seed.
Mhm.
Is that enough of a window to think about selling? Or is it absolutely tomorrow is my due date, I better sell? So in that 2 week to 1 day period, at what point do I say, golly, if I just wait 3 more days, I think
Right.
something's going to happen?
Go do that. It never ends well. It doesn't end well. I mean, if it does, then your luck is better than mine because I feel like anytime I've ever had a grower that's like, by Friday, I have to. And it's like, okay, well, let's just go ahead. Today's a good day, right? It's Tuesday. I'm going to see what happens over the next couple of. It never ends well. I mean, and I shouldn't say never. I always say that never use never and always when talking about commodities. But honestly, this is one of those situations. And I think it was I can't remember who it was. It was like buy whatever when you can, not when you have to. And the same sort of deal. Like, be moving your cash bushels when you can, when it feels like it's a right time. And so a lot of times farmers will always, assume, okay, well, if it's this good today, then it's going to be that much better tomorrow. Then it's possible, but that's where the focus on the cash prices that you want to be selling before the market gets there is super important too. Writing those target orders down, putting the solid target orders in, doing those types of things well ahead of time instead of making those decisions at the last minute is probably one of the better tools that I've seen.
But Angie, I have a fear of missing out on a higher
I
price.
know.
You told me to sell, and I know that's what you hear, and it's not the
Oh
case.
yeah. Yeah.
But I have this fear.
Yeah. And I will say this, and I said this in 2020, and leading up when we were on our way up, and I said it especially over the last year or so. I can tell you, like I said, I've been doing this for 20 years. I have watched a lot of cycles. I've seen a lot of cycles. I've seen some things like you can tell by the bags under my eyes. Like, I would rather all day, every day, for the rest of my life, have a grower yell at me because we sold a chunk of their bushels too soon. Because remember, if you're scale selling incrementally, you want the market to continue higher. I would rather get yelled at for selling 10% of a crop, even 20%, 30%, even whatever. I don't care. I would rather get yelled at for selling a portion of the crop with the grower and making smart decisions that were educated and watch the market go higher than have to figure out how the hell we put lipstick on the pig like we saw this past summer, where we had growers locking in hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of losses because the market went lower, kept going lower, and didn't stop until it basically punished us all. And so, yeah, I welcome it. Please yell at me because the price has gone up.
Yeah, I was trying to think of something smart to say. Forgive me for being paused right there because I'm like, yeah.
No.
I mean, your ear can start to bleed because you getting yelled at so much. Like a 4-year-old. We'll explain next episode of the MTOM podcast. I'm Paul Yeager. Thanks for watching. See you next time.